for the ownership of their pod. But this is our featured match here. So what could be the perfect sweep once again for Brad? As I recall, last year he swept day one undefeated as well.
I don't recall exactly. It would not surprise me. Brad is just a monster in these multi-format constructed tournaments.
Yeah, he had actually, we were checking, one loss on the entire Players' Championship last year. I mean, it brings his record at the Players' Championship into, you know, the 18 wins, 1 loss kind of territory.
Right.
He's dominant here.
Brad is a professional Magic player. He plays in 1 tournament a year. It is this one.
Yeah, last year locking up that Players' Championship slot allowed him to put his attention elsewhere. He made it back on the train as a Platinum Pro. And we are underway. Brad starting off with a really painful turn 1. It's a Godless Shrine into Thoughtseize, but he'll get the information for it. We see a pair of Goblin Guides, a pair of lands, a Lightning Bolt, a Grim Lavamancer, and a Boros Charm. This seems like a good start for Tom.
This is one of the upsides of playing a build of Zoo like this, is you are a lot more durable against discard spells. Builds of Burn often have hands with 1 creature, so a discard spell just leaves you with a handful of Lava Spikes. You can see the redundancy here in Ross's hand. Ross, unfortunately for him, has drawn by far the worst card in the deck, which is that stupid frickin' basic mountain. But you just have to have 1 mountain on the list, I think. But you really need to open up on Sacred Foundry Stomping Ground to facilitate your various basic land needs for your creatures and to be able to cast cards like a Tarkus Command alongside Boros Charm.
So the basic mountain in his hand means that Path to Exiles will no longer ramp Tom if Brad casts them.
They don't even matter if they ramp you under normal set of circumstances, and now Brad can be very aggressive using Path to Exile.
Brad contemplating what to take here. Now, historically, correct me if I'm wrong here, against the heavy burn versions of Red, they actually do pretty well against Abzan and Jund.
Yeah, your Skullcracks and your Atarka's commands interact with most of what they're up to, and it's very hard for them to stop the top of your deck. This is one of the costs of playing a more creature-oriented build is you are much more vulnerable to creatures that are good at blocking. And you look at Nelson's list, Kitchen Finks, Scavenging Ooze, Tarmogoyf, Siege Rhino, Tassiger. This is really a who's who of some of the best blockers in the format.
And this one's interesting. Brad actually chooses Grim Lavamancer. And I'll say, of the 1-drops, it wasn't the one I was expecting him to take.
Well, Lavamancer can be problematic if Scavenging Ooze is part of the equation. And Goblin Guides play very poorly against Kitchen Finks.
So Goblin Guide will be the play from Tom. It'll reveal a Tarmogoyf and hit Brad down to 14. As we know, a second Goblin Guide could be on its way next turn. And Brad looks like he'll just go ahead and fetch and then cast the Tarmogoyf that he was shown. Already up to a 3-4, thanks to that turn 1 Thoughtseize.
Goes without saying, a very different game with Ross on the play, based on opening hands.
So you go back over to Tom. He untaps here. We know Lightning Bolt, Goblin Guide, Boros Charm in hand. None of them on the surface deal with Tarmogoyf. There's not actually an instant in the graveyard either, so a lot of these tricks are poorly positioned.
Well, Ross can hang back. I believe he picked up a second copy of Boros Charm. So assuming that Brad doesn't have the ability to gain life, he can just wait, Boros Charm a few times, get him low, and hope that bolts off the top, or by going wide with haste creatures in one shot, can play around the Tarmogoyf. But there's not a lot to be gained right now by Ross playing creature and attacking, so you might as well just hang back.
Yeah, 2 Boros Charms and a Lightning Bolt. That is 11 points of burn. Tom could get all of it cast by the end of turn 3. So we go back over to Brad Nelson. It'll be a swing of Tarmogoyf. And that's certainly...
No blocks.
Yeah.
No blocks.
That's fine if Brad wants to tap his creatures. So first points on the board of damage on the board for Tom. He goes to 17. Follow up for Brad, a second Tarmogoyf and a Stirring Wildwood, and he will pass back. So the brick wall of Tarmogoyf set up early here for Brad on the play. Had to have a very painful turn 1 to do it, but that was about it. And it looks like we're going to see Tom go towards the burn route of things. This is what you mentioned.
With Brad going to 9 here from the Boros Charm, there's another guy in his hand that's guaranteed 2 points of damage this turn. That's 7. There's a Bolt and a Boros Charm left over. If Brad doesn't have a source of life gain here, Tom might be able to steal this one.
Wild Nacatl, the draw for Tom. He'd have to go for the Goblin Guide this turn, though, right?
Yes. This is perhaps his last window of this game to be able to get any damage in on the ground. Brad could potentially play another blocker next turn. He could just have removal spells in his hand. And he's not facing lethal on the way back.
So for Tom, draw was Nicatl.
I think that Tom has the tools in hand to win this game if Brad doesn't gain life. If Brad has a way to gain life, it becomes a lot more complicated.
Even something just like a kitchen finks. I suppose Brad has 8 points of power on the board.
Yes. I mean, Tom has exactly lethal at this point. So there's no margin for error.
Here's the line. 2 Goblin Guides. Tassiger is the card shown on the top. And Tom will trade a creature. Puts Brad down to 7. And here's a fetch for Tom. Yeah, he has Boros Charm, Lightning Bolt in hand. If there's no life gain on Brad's side, Tom just might be able to pull this off. Shocks down to a dangerous 11. And he'll play Wild Nicatl post-combat.
I think that I would prefer for Tom to just leave up the Boros Charm mana this turn, because he still can chump block the same way with Nicatl next turn, and he's very vulnerable to a discard spell here. Because if he loses the Boros Charm, he's drawing very thin.
Well, if he leaves up, now, Fulmir, if he leaves up the mana, and Brad activates Stirring Wildwood and swings, Tom can't actually... Well, he can't Boros Charm on end step because he'd be at 2, but that's actually okay.
Yeah.
Now we look at Brad. He has 8 points of power in play. Just Tarmogoyf will come across. That'll be an attack for 4. No blocks on Tom's side.
I'm not sure if this is no blocks. This might
He
be...
might trade.
Well, it's not even a trade. It's just this might be Ross's only opportunity to chump block. Because
Interesting, okay.
The following turns, Brad might go, all right, kill all your stuff, attack you. So if you think that this Nicatl has no chance to attack for the remainder of the game, which seems likely, it may not be a bad spot to get your chump block in.
Contemplate. Tom will join Brad at 7 life. And post-combat, you were talking about how he should be worried. It's going to be Kitchen Finks. Brad will jump up to 9. You're saying those 2 points may just be the difference in game 1 here.
Yes.
Lightning Bolt puts Brad to 6. Now Tom's playing off the top of his deck. He needs some cheap interaction. It is Monastery Swift Spear. Here's a swing across. And that should do it. Boros Charm is the play. Swift Spear exactly enough damage. In game 1, over to Tom Ross.
Yeah, that was quite an impressive display. You know, you saw that game. Ross played a bit more like a burn deck than this deck often does. That's the important thing to do. Once Brad gets the board gummed up, the creatures are not worth very much. But Ross drew very well in those last couple turns.
Wow.
Right mixture of burn spells and haste creatures to finish out the game.
So Tom's stealing a game off Brad Nelson here. We'll go ahead and look at the sideboard. Remember, if Tom deals Brad a loss here, both these players would only have 1 loss on the tournament.
Yeah, very impressive run for both these players thus far.
All right, we'll look at Brad Nelson. He's down a game. We know his main deck is fairly stocked on life gain, but it looks like when we go to the sideboard, things only get better.
He's got an Engineered Explosive, 3 Fulminator Mages, a Kitchen Finks, a Thragtusk, 2 Stony Silences, a Celestial Purge, a Slaughter Pact, a Sword and Solemn Visitor, a Damnation, 2 copies of Painful Truce, and a Bitter Blossom. So the Kitchen Finks and the Thragtusk stand out as being the best cards here. The Engineered Explosives is also very good, as this deck is just saturated with a lot of 1-mana creatures. There's some slower cards here like Sorin and Damnation that I'm not that huge of a fan of, but it's possible Brad thinks they're better than some of the other options in his main deck. He probably wants to get away from Thoughtseize. I don't think Lingering Souls is a great card in this matchup because it doesn't block very effectively. So if he wants to get some of the slower cards out, I could see bringing in the 4-mana cards that are slow but a lot more powerful.
So how do you feel about something like Celestial Purge, just extra kill spells for some of Tom's cheap cards?
2 mana and it doesn't kill everything. Again, this is a question of, is that... It's not great in the matchup. It's totally fine, and it's a function of how many bad cards does Brad feel he has in the deck.
All right, over on Tom's side, we have 3 Destructive Revelry, 2 Lightning Helix, 4 Path to Exile, 2 Rending Volley, a Gaddock Teague, and a Roast available.
So the 2 copies of Roast are very well suited for this matchup. Always kills Tarmogoyf, always kills Siege Rhino. You also don't want to be ramping the deck, so there's only so much of Path to Exiling you can really be doing. I think you want some number of Path to Exiles in this matchup, but not the full 4. Ross needs to make sure he has a critical mass of threats and burn spells. So I like the 2 Roasts, and I would probably bring in about 2 copies of Path to Exile, but I don't think I'd bring in the full 4.
All right, so we'll get that match post-board underway in just a second here. We're going to take a second to talk about StarCityGames.com Game Night. We've been running this for all of 2015. So if you aren't familiar with this, what this means is this is run all around the country at stores near you, making a tournament a StarCityGames.com Game Night, featuring every week exclusive pins and tokens for the month. This month for the holidays, you can receive the reindeer token pictured here. It's a nice 01 caribou to maybe go with the caribou range that you might want to make in your winter or Ice Age otherwise themed deck. Next month, though, as things start to thaw, we'll go over to Grizzly Brand. That's for January. And if you get signed up now, you can get signed up in time for our February promotion, and that is the Magus of the Moo. That's a 2/3 Minotaur token given away. So learn more about this at starcitygames.com/game night to get involved. Going back to our match, though, this is one where we thought it was tough for Tom. He did take game one. Now, my guess, as true with most Burn or Zoo decks, is game one is the easy one to get.
Right. That's the same thing when you're playing decks like this against Abzan and against Jund. You normally capitalize on the fact that they have about 4 or 5 cards in their main deck that aren't very good in the matchup. There's some number of Thought Seizes, which Brad drew that game, which wasn't very good. They have some number of Dark Confidants and so forth. When they get to board those cards out, and they're bringing in things like more Kitchen Finks and more Thragtusks, more 1 and 2 mana removal spells. That's where things get a lot more challenging. So great for Tom to be able to get that game, though, especially on the draw. It means, worst case scenario, he has a crack at it on the play for game number 3. And this deck's best hands on the play can power through a lot of stuff. Wild Nikado into Eidolon,
That's a lot of damage.
Brad can have a hand of turn 2 Tarmogoyf and turn 3 Kitchen Finks, and that's still not going to be enough a good percentage of the time. So.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see Tom be able to get that. I mean, you look at cards like 3/4 Tarmogoyfs on the play. Brad had 2 of them. That normally is excellent against a Curd Ape style deck, but Tom was actually just able to get enough damage in, I guess, with the direct damage, and then really it helped him that Brad was shocked for a Thoughtseize on turn 1. That felt like a big punishment move.
Yes, and the problem there is that Brad's hand's sort of forced because he wants to cast a Tarmogoyf from the second turn of the game. If he just goes turn 1 land go, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, now a Bolt or a Searing Blade kills it. Plus, Tom might only have 1 creature in the opening hand, or there might be 1 creature that's a lot better than everything else, like a Wild Nikado. So you can understand why he wanted to take that line, get the best threat out of the hand, get some information, get a Tarmogoyf that's a 3/4, so now it can't really be killed game 1. But those 4 points of damage obviously were critical, as Tom was able to deal exactly lethal damage that game through a Kitchen Finks.
Yeah, I mean, it really, he had 2 Goblin Guides, not 1. His hand was pretty Thoughtseize proof. We'll see what Brad can do next this game 2. He is back on the play again. Now, you'd think cards like Thoughtseize would no longer be in the deck post-board?
I think so. Inquisition's still quite good in the matchup, but the Thoughtseize is, this deck's very redundant, and your life total is a precious commodity.
So we go back here between these 2 players. Brad Nelson, Tom Ross, both of them top 8ing last year's Invitational. It was Brad Nelson, I believe, that knocked Tom Ross out of the tournament playing for top 8 last year.
Another issue that I've encountered with this Zoo list in the Abzan and Jund style matchups is that you have a lot of cards that are really good some percentage of the time and really poor other percentage of the time. If you're on Boros Charms, let's say, and their draw is very removal oriented, the Boros Charms, you might not be able to piece together enough damage. Mutagenic Growth, if they're on Tarmogoyf and trying to block, Mutagenic Growth can be great. And if they're on removal spells or discard spells, Mutagenic Growth is really poor. Sometimes the game's a damage race and Lightning Helix great, and sometimes Lightning Helix isn't really involved. I think that Curd Ape is the worst card in the matchup post-board. That's usually what I take out.
It seems like it gets outclassed just like the other 1-drops, except this one doesn't have haste.
Yeah, it doesn't have haste, and the Coddle ceiling is really high. Even when Curd Ape is good, it's not that good.
Brad having kept on a 7. Tom tanking here. He's on the mulligan, so his scry was to the bottom. And we start with Inquisition of Kozilek from Brad. We'll see Tom's holdings. This one is a lot more susceptible to removal. We have 3 lands, Goblin Guide, Grim Lavamancer, Lightning Bolt.
Yeah, this is some of the nightmare scenarios in these 3-color mid-range matchups, especially with Ross taking a mulligan. 1 threat gets removed. Let's say the Grim Lavamancer gets selected. The Goblin Guide can be killed, or if Nelson has a Tarmogoyf, that's good enough. And then Ross is a Lightning Bolt and some lands.
So sizing this one out, I mean, I'll tell you what, now that there's only 1 Goblin Guide instead of 2, I think Brad's going to go for the haste creature this time around.
It depends what his hand is like. If he has something like Kitchen Finks or Tarmogoyf, he's much better served getting rid of the Grim Lavamancer that can be effective outside of combat than the Goblin Guide. If his hand is light on blockers, maybe Goblin Guide's the better choice of the 2.
Well, Brad's surveying here. A lot less burn, and he's going to go once again, you mentioned, you're right, for the Grim Lavamancer, so allows Tom to turn 1 Goblin Guide. For Tom, the draws an Arid Mesa. That's land 4. And he'll fetch here for Goblin Guide.
Yeah, on the mulligans here, the land heavy ones, it's just so important for Ross to hit nothing but spells for the rest of the game. So drawing that Arid Mesa on the first turn is very bad news. There's no way for him to convert that mana into anything effective, and he's running very resource light as it is.
Goblin Guide did find Brad a Marsh Flats, and now once again we have a turn 2 Tarmogoyf. So similar start for Brad, except this time he did not Thoughtseize, he Inquisition, so he's on 2 more life, and Tom's on 2 fewer burn spells.
Yep. And we may have hit the end of the road. Ross with just a bolt. He's drawn 2 lands in the first 2 turns here, and nothing to do but pass.
Yeah, his hand seemed like there was, on a 6, it was speculative. You saw him scry to the bottom as well. It just doesn't seem like this one has panned out to put up much of a fight.
If he pieces together the right set of spells there off the top, that's a totally functional 6-card hand. And going to 5 against a deck like Abzan, I think, is a non-starter if your hand's at all functional. But Ross has not drawn well in the subsequent turns.
So we go back over to Brad Nelson. This is going to be his 3rd turn. Does have a copy of Liliana of the Veil at the ready.
Liliana is also just a really problematic card in games like this. Nelson can just start plussing. He can minus if he wants to and just go on the offensive. He can also plus if he respects the possibility that Ross has drawn very well, try to whittle down his hand. There's not a lot of attacking for Ross to do because he can't punish the Tarmogoyf right now. So Nelson, either minusing and attacking or plussing and hanging back, has 2 very good routes with Liliana.
And it's interesting. If you just plus, Tarmogoyf's a great blocker. He can just run Tom out of cards.
Yep.
Well, we'll see the play. Looks like Path to Exile on Goblin Guide. Tom, well, he will get another land, though that's not entirely what he needs right now. Swing is for 4. That shows why we have the pre-combat path, adds instant to the yard. And a 2nd Tarmogoyf. So once again, Brad, turn 1 discard into turn 2, turn 3 Tarmogoyf. This time it seems like it'll be enough.
And assuming that Ross wants to sacrifice that fetch land at some point, he goes to 12. He's facing down 2 4-power creatures that he can't answer right now.
Yeah, draw for the turn was Searing Blaze. That's no help against creatures of this size.
Searing Blaze is another card in the matchup. When it's good, it's great, but it's often not very good, and the deck is chock full of cards like that in this kind of matchup.
Back over to Brad Nelson. He's looking at a Siege Rhino in his hand. He's going to make short work here. A swing for 8 puts Tom to 5. Land and Rhino will put Tom to 2, and we'll put the match into game 3. So Brad equalizes at 1 game apiece.
Yeah, a mulligan there for Ross on the draw. A not very good opening hand. It did not get much better. And Nelson with a great curve of discard into blockers that could quickly get on the offensive.
All right, so we'll work again for game 3. But game 3 is going to be different. This is going to be the first one where Tom is on the play. Does that get away from Brad's plan of discard into Tarmogoyfs? Discard seems like it may be slower with Brad not having the initiative.
Yes, especially when Ross goes turn 1 threat. Going untapped dual land discard spell, especially given the redundancy of this deck, it's possible that the discard spell doesn't really break up Ross's curve at all, and then you're way behind on the board, way behind in life total. So play draw is definitely a huge deal in this matchup.
Players getting ready for game 3. As we reach the end of our season here with the Players' Championship, it means we reach the end of our season for the Winter Creatures Collection. If you haven't had a chance to look at this one, this features all your favorite arts from SCG Game Nights from October, November, and December. So that would be your hippo, your otter, your reindeer from these 3 fall months. You can get them on playmats, sleeves, and in-player bundles, as well as our parody art, which, of course, this time is going to be the Penguillion Click. There we go. Penguillion Click. 3 flying lovely penguins. See, birds fly, but penguins need jetpacks to do it. That's why, of course, they're wearing them.
That's the joke. That they're birds, but they don't fly. That's the joke. And it rhymes with Vendilion, kind of. So there's 2 jokes.
All right. But you can find out more about it at starcitygames.com/creature collection. You're going to want to get these while they are still available. All right, game 3, Tom Ross, Brad Nelson. You said at the beginning you liked Brad in the matchup, but then Tom took game 1. Now we're playing 1 post-board game for all of it. Tom gets to be on the play. Who do you like?
I still think Nelson has an edge, but Ross can draw up a 7-card hand where he can look at it and be pretty confident it's going to be good no matter what's happening on the other side of the table.
Tom's best draws seem like they're out of range sometimes.
It's part of the allure when I started working on this deck, where I got some I got a reasonable number of opening hands on the play where I said it just doesn't even matter what's happening on the other side of the table. There's a removal spell here. There's an insane curve of creatures. You have Atarka's Command, and Boros Charm has a lot of brute force power. So this is what you sign up for the deck. Your best hands on the play are so much better than anything that even Burn can put together because you are so redundant in your threats. You're not going to be broken up by one removal spell or one discard spell.
Great nut draws, ignoring your opponent. That is definitely something I can get behind. This deck, I've been impressed by it since it's really shown up.
I won a game the other day where I killed on turn 3 through turn 2 Remand, turn 3 Deceiver Exarch, tap something.
Sure.
Your best draws are as good as any combo deck in the format.
I mean, most of my combo decks cannot beat Remand into Deceiver Exarch on my land, to be fair.
Yeah. So you do get to be a creature beatdown deck. Undisrupted or lightly disrupted, the deck kills pretty consistently around turn 4. You do get hands that win on the 3rd turn. It's tough in this matchup because Brad's equipped with discard, removal, and good blockers starting as early as the 2nd turn. But again, your best 7s on the play are really hard to beat.
Right, the danger is that a cards like Abrupt Decay suddenly become reasonable against you, whereas against traditional Burn, they don't do as much.
Exactly. Yeah, you are. And well, the bigger thing is, because Abrupt Decay is going to be fine against Burn, most of their draws do involve at least one creature. The biggest issue is blockers. Sometimes Tarmogoyf is worth 3 or 4 cards on your side of the table, and against Burn, it's never doing that much work. And that's why the Abzan matchup in particular is challenging, because not only do they have Tarmogoyf, but they have Kitchen Finks and Tassiger and Siege Rhino, and often those cards are worth several cards on the other side of the table. And you don't top deck as well because you don't have Lava Spikes and Rift Bolts to finish out the games when things kind of stall out and you have a couple draw steps to cobble together lethal.
Brad Nelson with Abzan. We saw him on camera 2 rounds ago against Jacob Wilson, fellow player on the Pro Tour. Managed to take that one down. Abzan v. Jund. Was convincing in it at that. Round 2, defeated Jim Davis playing Tron. Impressive one for Brad. Got both sideboarded games in the matchup.
Brad's got a lot of action here for mid-range style matchups. He's definitely trying to beat those.
Tom will be on a mulligan. Brad looking like he is keeping. Now on these decks, we're like Tom, if when you're counting to 20, you feel like every card counts.
Well, this is another reason that I like Zoo more than Burn, is I feel like I can mulligan with this deck. Whenever I mulligan with Burn, I felt like, all right, I'm going to draw up a hand of 3 lands and a creature and 2 burn spells, and if my opponent's hand is at all functional, that's not going to be good enough. Here you can draw up opening hands of, 3 creatures, a removal spell, and 2 lands, and yeah, that's fine. You can definitely mulligan with this deck.
Well, an uncontested Nakato can do upwards of 6, maybe 9 damage, whereas an uncontested Lava Spike does 3.
Eidolon is worth a lot of points of damage with the right draws, and because you have so many creatures, Atarka's Command is often worth 6 or 7 points of damage.
Actually, Brad gives it a second thought, decides he's going to join Tom on 6 cards.
Yeah, I don't know what was wrong with Nelson's hand. It must have been very land short or very light on interaction because he had at least 1 land in a Tarmogoyf. Usually that's going to be good enough, but he didn't have land number 2.
I believe he was on no green, so both players are going to take that scry here.
The scry doesn't matter that much for this deck on the play because there's 14 fetch lands, so
you scry and then you fetch away your card.
Right. That I forget to do this all the time. It's on the draw, it's different because you're actually taking your draw step, but on the play, you're not. This deck does not maximize the Vancouver Mulligan rule on the play.
Yeah, it is one of the things when you have a heavy fetch land mana base. Sometimes your scry doesn't count for much.
If
on our backup match, we have. What is it? For a big comeback for Alex Bestecki. The unknown, 0-3 in Legacy, but goes ahead and saves his tournament life by 3-0ing in Modern. Ends the day 3-3. That's going to be enough to advance him into the knockout rounds tomorrow, where he'll have to run the gauntlet to get in through Standard.
Yeah, congratulations. Great comeback here, and now Rudy will be playing a match for his future next round.
Yep, Rudy's 2-0 start in Modern. Needed to win this round or next. Didn't get the first time. He'll get another shot next round, though. So we start out Tom Ross. That's the one drop you're talking about. Turn 1, it's Wild Nakato. Go over to Brad. Does have a turn 1 Inquisition of Kozilek.
Also, he has one of his best sideboard cards there in Engineered Explosives.
Now, is this the sort of thing, can Tom afford to play around Engineered Explosives?
My experience, especially on mulligans, is no. He just has to play the stuff in his hand. Because if he tries to slow play things, he can get gobbled up by removal. He can get gobbled up by one big blocker. And there's only one
Sure.
engineered explosive in the 75. So it's very rare that your hand has the luxury to play around that card.
Brad's hand, you see Path to Exile, Inquisition of Kozilek, Engineer Explosives, a lot of action on one. Here's Inquisition of Kozilek from Brad, and we see the holding. Goblin Guide, Wild Nacatl, Path to Exile, Atarka's Command. Only one land for Tom, but what a selection of creatures.
If Ross is able to find a plateau off the top here, this hand becomes excellent. But without another source of mana here, he's basically looking at just one more creature, neither of which are particularly powerful, and no castable spells in hand.
We'll see what Brad chooses to take. He has a Path to Exile for next turn. On turn 3, he could crack Engineered Explosives on one, but he's going to take some heat before that.
Yeah, what Brad is trying to do right now is work through. The worst case scenario is there's a Sacred Foundry available.
Something that makes a plains.
What happens in that scenario, and what's the most dangerous card?
Right. Because without Sacred Foundry, the Nacatl's a 2/2, not as threatening. He has some life points to work with. Looks like he's going for Goblin Guide.
Goblin Guide here it's definitely castable and powerful. If Ross has a plateau, however, if he's able to find a Sacred Foundry, suddenly he has a 2/3/3s in play plus ability cast, Path to Exile, and a Atarka's Command.
And Tom bricks on the draw there, so it's forced to swing for 2, play a second Nacatl, and pass. Maybe the window Brad's looking for. It looks like he has a second Inquisition of Kozilek picked up this turn.
Well, if he does not have land number 3, then he has to consider casting the explosives this turn. If he's got land number 3, this path is very easy. You discard this turn, take your lumps, blow up the board, and hope to just draw better with your more powerful cards.
Inquisition of Kozilek shows a hand of 2 Path to Exiles and an Atarka's Command. Brad will take the burn spell, Atarka's Command down, leaving Tom with 2 uncastable Path to Exiles. And here's the card you mentioned, Engineered Explosives on 1. Brad's going to take one more hit off these Nacatls and then sweep the board. For Tom, draw was a land.
Land's not bad here. I mean, it's worth
2 points of damage?
Yep. And now your Path to Exiles are unlocked.
So he'll be able to stay alive for a while. He'll get Brad to 9. From there, the path gets murkier.
Well, he's got 2 paths in hand, so at least he is able to play through blockers if he happens to draw creatures. He also just might be able to piece together 9 points of burn, although that's challenging to do.
So Sacred Foundry is the fetch. It's tapped. Both the Nacatls power up to 3/3 thanks to Tom's Plains. And the swing comes in. Brad goes from 15 to 9. Low, but he has the answer in play. Engineered Explosives will keep the board clean. Brad will just need to recover before Tom can get those last 9 points across. And the draw for Brad should be something that helps him do it. It's a copy of Scavenging Ooze.
Well, Scavenging Ooze a lot worse in the face of the Path to Exiles he knows about.
And this one's interesting. I'm not certain Brad has more lands. We will see here. He knows about the double Path to Exile. So playing out a blocker certainly is a risk.
And this is the confusing thing right now. You're wondering what's Brad thinking about? If Brad uses the explosives right away, and Tom can draw his creature and use it. If he waits, though, Ross is drawing Boros Charm to make his permanents indestructible.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that was not a straightforward play there from Brad.
His play was to crack Engineer Explosives, say go. Tom's draw was Wild Nacatl. He plays it and passes back. Brad at 9, now another creature he has to face down. Did draw the land. Looks like a fetch for Brad. He's getting lower and lower here. He can play Ooze and Path to Exile, though.
It's a fine turn. He's also just, at this point, trying to fill up the graveyard as much as possible because he has Tasigur in hand. So he can just make these exchanges, run Ross out of resources, and then be able to play Tasigur with mana up to do something else.
So here's the fetch. Brad down to 8. Now we're looking at 2 burn spells. It will be Scavenging Ooze, or it'll be Tasigur, rather, with just a single white up. And a pass. So it doesn't actually need to Path to Exile yet this turn on the Nacatl, I guess, unless Tom paths first.
Which Tom is very likely to do. This sequence here is also very nice from Brad here. He's trying to set up Scavenging Ooze and actually get some points out of it, even if Ross has an answer. So he's playing the Tasigur first, knowing full well it's going to get killed. That will likely let him get another land out of his deck, play Scavenging Ooze, eat some stuff out of Tom's graveyard. Then he'll have a cushion. He'll be at 10 or 11 life points. And then it's his draw steps against Tom's. And Brad's are a lot better, especially once he has 4 mana in play.
Right, he can cast Scavenging Ooze with green up in the following turns. Tom's draw was Sacred Foundry, so his hand is now 2 paths and a Foundry. He's going to pass the turn. That's not going to stop Brad from pathing the Nacatl, though. Nacatl out. Tom will get the 1 mountain out of his deck, but left with just 2 removal spells, Brad's still at 8. And you have to wonder if this Tasigur is going to live through the upkeep. Don't imagine it is. Nope, Brad untaps, and here comes a Path to Exile from Tom. Swamp into play. But right now, both players trading on empty hands. That does favor Abzan.
For sure. Brad's cards are just substantially more powerful than Tom's.
And for Brad, it will be Kitchen Finks. He goes up to 10, plays a land, and passes. Tom does have 1 more path as an answer. Draw was Lightning Helix. So now Tom's in a spot where he has to decide between killing Brad's creatures and going at Brad with these burn spells. I feel like he has to point it at the creatures, but if that's the case, where's the end game?
I think that he has to ignore the creatures as much as he can and just go after Brad, because trying to play a game for 7 more turns is not going to be a successful plan for Tom.
Draw for Brad was huge. It's a 2nd copy of Kitchen Finks. He will go up to 12. Tom to 13. The life totals switching back in Brad Nelson's favor. He will pass. Last card there, a Scavenging Ooze at that. And Tom will continue to draw. It's one of the sideboarded roasts you talked about. But these cards, so difficult to play in the face of Kitchen Finks.
Yeah, and a lot of these removal spells are excellent against the larger creatures of the deck. Usually, Kitchen Finks is just everything you want in this kind of matchup. It's life gain. It's well-sized to brawl inside of combat. It can survive removal spells. It can trade with creatures and come right back. It's one of the worst cards for this deck to play against.
And Tom, no choice but to just continue to pass toward Brad. Here's a swing for 6. Tom forced to Path to Exile away 1 of the Finks. It means Tom will take 3 and go to 10. Brad will get to the last basic out of his deck. And 5 mana on the follow-up is Thragtusk from Brad. The 1-of out of the sideboard. That was the top deck for the turn. That'll put Brad up to a near unbeatable 17.
Come on, man. Oh, Eidolon.
Just not even giving him hope here.
Great.
Great. Thragtusk is... that's going to make it hard. How much life gain here from Brad? Thragtusk, 2 Kitchen Finks. We believe he still has a Scavenging Ooze as the last card in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just in case. Just in case this Thragtusk isn't going to be good enough. We do see upkeep Lightning Helix on Thragtusk. It'll die. Tom will gain 3. Brad will get a Beast token. That won't be able to attack this turn. Well played by Tom, but Tom running out of cards. 1 in hand. And now he's on the wrong side of the life total exchange. 3 from Finks puts Tom down to 10. And that said, on the mull to 6, Tom's draw had a lot going for it. You know, he had 2 Nacatls, a Goblin Guide. See, Brad just dumps the hand on the table. Tasigur and Scavenging Ooze. He has 12 power on the board. Tom with 10 life, no blockers. He'll roast the Tasigur. Bolt the Scavenging Ooze. Leaves Brad with 6 power. Here's 6. Tom goes to 4. Liliana of the Veil gets Tom's last card. And now Tom is in top deck mode. And that's not going to do it. Match Brad Nelson, so completes the perfect 6-0 on the day. Once again, undefeated on day 1 for Brad Nelson. He will be the top seed heading into tomorrow.